Welcome to Building Bridges, the program in support of the women and men of the New York City Police Department. In our last program, I indicated as we closed the show, we were going to have a program this month that dealt with a topic that's rarely discussed and rarely heard of. It has to deal with compassionate policing. And I've asked three gentlemen to join me in discussing this topic, and I had the honor and privilege of working with them when they were on the faculty of the New York City Police Academy when we were teaching recruits. And I'd like for them to introduce themselves. John?
Hello, my name is Jon Karl. I'm retired captain, major case, 28 years of service, 32 commendations.
Can you also indicate what you do right now?
The last 30 years I've been pastoring a church on Staten Island, Christian Pentecostal.
Ed Stubbing, retired in 1984, 18 years on the job. Worked in the 69th Precinct, then eventually moved up to the 32nd Precinct when I became sergeant. That particular precinct was extremely meaningful to me. And that's it. I'm here to just throw out a couple of memories.
And I'm Peter Mancuso. I'm retired in 1987 from the NYPD. I actually vested at 17 and a half years. I had a very interesting career, did a lot of different things in the department, but two that are particularly, maybe we'll touch on this topic, are having chaired the social science department at the police academy. Ed, in fact, was assistant chair of that department. And also, when I left the department, I was the assistant director of training.
Ed, on the way here today, we were discussing some examples of compassionate policing. You want to start off?
You know, as I look back at a period of 40 to 50 years ago, and I think of the police career, I think of some arrests, but I'll tell you, I think more about instances where compassion made the difference in the lives of people. When I started in the 69th Precinct, it was in some ways a difficult precinct. It was next to Brownsville. Part of our precinct was in Brownsville. And every 4 to 12, an officer had to patrol a warehouse that was just about one full block. And this was a disaster. It was meaningless. From my point of view, this was a time prior to NAP where there were things going on within the department that should not have been going on. But it was the officers assigned there every 4 to 12 who really paid a heavy price. However, on one instance, the next block over, there were multiple houses, and I saw, I'm going to say 4 young boys, 10 to 12, riding their bikes on that block and coming up to where I was, standing there and slowly dying. They came across the street and we started talking. And it was the usual, what's it like to be an officer and these kinds of things, which are interesting. And somehow I said, hey, look, you guys, you want to do some racing up this block? The block had no traffic whatsoever. You want to do some races? I'll tell you what, I'll give you a quarter each time somebody wins. So they leaped at the opportunity. And I'm guessing 5, 7 races anytime they came over to where I was working in future tours when I was assigned there. A bond was established. And the thing I will never forget is I saw them coming down their block on their bikes again. They were approaching the corner, had to cross the street to where I was. And this is what I hear. It's him. It's him. And I kind of think, you know what? I might have made a big difference in these children's lives for a simple little thing like races. They made a difference in my life. So moments of compassion, where you go the little bit extra, it reaps numerous benefits to both yourself and to those who receive the compassion. I remember in the same precinct arresting a teenager, 16. He was in the middle of the street. Amphetamines were falling out of his pocket. I arrested him for possession of narcotics. Went down to night court. I got to know his dad. Dad was a single parent trying to hold his family together. Maybe 3 or 4 months later, I saw a report of a 16-year-old killed at the same intersection. And it hit me that, okay, maybe the same kind of event happened where he's high on narcotics or high on amphetamines, and look what happens. I asked myself, is there anything I can do about that? I felt terrible. And what I did was I went to the boy's wake. I met the father. He gave me a hug, and I think I made a difference. Incidents like these, where you go the little bit extra. There was a sergeant came out to me on a post, and he said, we have this letter that was written to the police commissioner about a job that you did when you responded to the emotionally disturbed person who was her son. And he came right to the point. Did you save his life? I said, no, I didn't save his life. But the gist of the letter, based on what his mom said to me on the scene, was she wanted to write to police commissioner because of the sensitive way I handled her son, who was maybe 25. He was a member of Mensa, the organization of extremely high IQ. And I don't, for the life of me, I can't remember what I said to him. But it was just reaching out and trying to help him in his time of crisis. So in answer to the question, did I save his life? No, I didn't save his life. But I might have made a difference in his life when he had a crisis that needed some real help. Prisoners. I always made, my policy was always with prisoners to treat them with utmost respect. Always keep your guard up, never let it down. However, never be sarcastic, never be rude, never laugh at a prisoner, never do anything demeaning. You've taken away his freedom. He's at a loss in many respects as to what's going to happen to him when he gets to court. It is a terrible time in his life. Justice has been served, but always give dignity to your prisoners. Never take that away. That was something I always did. I felt good about it. I give one little anecdote as a result of this policy. I made a narcotics arrest, and the fellow was probably 20, 22. He said, you know what? I'm in a bit of trouble here because I'm claustrophobic. Can you help me get through this? So I didn't put him in the cell in the precinct when we were doing the paperwork. I cuffed him, and that was it. And then when we went to court, I intervened in terms of the correction officers and explained the scenario, and they did what they could. And when I got a chance, I could take a look at him, and I just kind of nodded at him, and we got through the processing, and he got bail and so forth. He became working for the police department, Brooklyn South Narcotics, and he became an informant for the Brooklyn South Narcotics, to the point that the commander of that unit wrote a letter saying, great job, and got a day off as a result of that. But again, that's almost an aside. There is that was a little unusual to get somebody who wanted to cooperate that much. But the essence is prisoners maintain their dignity at all costs. Then my time in Harlem, extremely enlightening, gave me a different perspective on working in a low-income precinct. and moments of compassion. The one that comes to mind first, hot summer day, Fifth Avenue, or now Malcolm X Avenue, busy afternoon. Lots of people hanging around, hot, probably June, July. My partner and I went up to a location and we responded. I forget what the call was. We come back down, and what do I see but a girl with a lemonade stand. And so I walk over to her and say, "Oh, could I have one of them?" So I paid her whatever it was and took it. "Oh, most delicious," and going on like this. And I look over at the building that we had come out of, and there's a fella there, sunglasses on, fedora hat, and he's looking at me, and he goes like this. And I did the same to him. And there it is, compassion and a bond. I don't know what this fella did for a living, who knows, but he appreciated the gesture and the meaningfulness of it, and so did I, and so did the girl, who I'm sure would tell her parents, "You know what happened to me today?" These moments, they add a compassion component that helps both the officer and those who receive the compassion. If I have time later, I'd like to talk more about the experience in Harlem.
Thank you, Ed. Pete, you worked in a tough precinct, the 9th.
Well, before I get about the 9th, I'd just like to go make reference back to Ed for a moment, because how I met Ed was that I was chairing the social science department of the police academy, and I got a call from this sergeant, who later became Ed, asking if I would be willing to do a special training for 10 police officers that he was supervising in domestic violence intervention. And I was really, really taken by that, and he brought the men down, and we did the training for about a week. Mm-hmm. And came not long afterward, I had this opportunity to choose anybody in the department as the assistant chairman of the social science department. So I did something terrible, and I went after Sergeant Ed Stubbing, who was in the 32nd precinct at the time. And the day that I went up there, or the day that, about a day before he was about to come to my command, he was being awarded a community service award by the Harlem community.
Wow.
So in many ways, I had a very mixed feelings about asking for him to be reassigned, because I was pulling him away from this community that appreciated him so much. But at the same time, I knew that he would have a tremendous impact on thousands of police recruits that we would be training.
Absolutely.
In terms of curriculum development.
Sure.
So that's how Ed and I got to meet. But talking a little bit about what he's speaking of, and not particularly 9th Precinct, yes, was a very, very active and dangerous place in the mid-'70s. It had about 70 homicides a year in the East Village of New York. But regardless of where you work, I think one of the most important things for police officers is communication. And one of the things I think that is most critical to communication is active listening. And that officers I know are under time constraints. They're under pressures to respond to maybe multiple jobs and, do things in a hurry. But there is so much to be gained by an officer actively listening and taking a time with a person for a person to articulate, what's happening to them or what has happened to them, and whether they be a victim or somebody in an accident or some kind of a situation where medical assistance is required or whatever, and or even in situations where there's disputes. And it's very, very critical that police officers listen and appear to be listening. I think what often happens is we work in pairs in the New York Police Department by and large. And oftentimes we're more concerned with our partner. And yes, there is that concern and you want to watch out for your partner's back. But there are times when you really got to focus on the citizen, the person who's out there, the person who's summoned you for assistance, or the person where you're intervening in something, or whatever you're doing. I have a great story about how important nonverbal communication is, and a fellow who was one of our better trainers for supervisors in the NYPD, who went on to a major university for another 20 years, teaching criminal justice, and whose son was a ranking executive, actually, in federal law enforcement. And I remember him telling me a story about having called his son one day, and he was out of town. So his daughter-in-law explained that his son was out training. So he said, well, have him call me when he gets back, And the son called him, and the son said to him, he said to the son, so where were you? He said, we were down in Glencoe, Georgia, which is the federal law enforcement training center. And he said, what did they have you doing down there? He says, well, they had us doing, even though I'm not really involved in this too often, but they had us doing a lot of emergency kind of things, or even practicing early morning raids. So my friend, a former NYPD guy, said to his son, did they have you wearing a ski mask? And he said, yeah, they did. He said, you really don't want to wear that. He says, it cuts down on your communication. It makes you less human. It makes you not being able to express yourself fully in a situation where you may be startling somebody, or in a situation that could be a very high-pressure situation. You become less human to that person. So I thought about that, and I said, so true, because getting involved in communication often requires every bit of eye contact you can make, facial expressions you can make, and that in many, many ways will help any officer get through situations upon situations where he can really explain things better, disarm people better in a way, and reduce tensions, and make somebody feel like, well, I really do have this police officer's attention. He really is concerned with what's happening here. And too often officers are in situations where, they have to put that on the back burner, or so they think. But they can get a lot more mileage in doing the job they need to do in hot situations, and keep them cool situations by that communication technique.
Yeah. Pete, I agree with you with respect to being a good listener. Whenever I dealt with someone, especially if it was a domestic quarrel, I listened to them to the extent that I wanted to make them feel like they were a member of my family, and that I was very understanding and compassionate. And I recall a case I had up in the 2-4. This husband and wife, they were arguing, and it was kind of bad. So I had to try to convince the husband to leave, and it really wasn't easy. He didn't want to leave. I took him outside. I had a nice talk with him. I said, "Listen, do you have some place to go?" I said, "Because if you do, it's best that you leave at least for tonight, and then you can come back tomorrow. And while you're gone, I'll talk to your wife." So he left, and I had a brief discussion with her, and I said, "Listen. He's gone. Things will be fine. I'll be back tomorrow night to see if you're okay." I showed up the next night. I knocked on the door. She was like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I told you I was coming back." She says, "I thought you just said that." I said, "No, I meant it. And here I am. And, I want to make sure that you're fine, that everything is okay." And I'm sure we all have similar stories to something like this. Ed and I were talking about stories like this on the way to the studio. John, you have any stories similar to that?
Well, I'll say this. I agree with all of you. I think what people don't realize is that in a city like ours, where we have so many different types of people, different cultures, we become the social workers many times because we're there when the thing is happening. But in regard to the police, one of the things I've learned, I started out in Transit Bureau. We were by ourselves. And when you're by yourself, you have to learn how to talk to people. And I tell this to the new men coming on, new ladies coming on. Get out of the car once in a while. Introduce yourself to the community. They want to know your name. And they want you to know their name. And believe it or not, when it comes to information, they're more willing to tell you what they wouldn't tell someone else about something that's going on illegally. Of course, you don't get them involved. But I think that's a big thing. We call it community policing today. But I have found in my career, there's good and bad people too. And there's bad and good people. But the thing that saves you as a cop is respect. Mm-hmm. If you want respect, you have to give respect. And you'll find with most people, if you respect them, I'm not saying you don't arrest them because they did something wrong, but if you treat them like a human being, you're going to find that you've made a friend, even though it's a negative situation.
Absolutely.
Because I've been in situations alone where a whole group of people wanted to fight me. I'm 5'8", 130 pounds. I mean, it's impossible. And yet, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times. As this crowd came toward me, I had another crowd behind me say, leave that cop alone. He's our friend. And I turned around and looked at them, and half of them I had locked up. But I had treated them with respect. Look, you're going to get locked up. You can come like a gentleman or you can come like an animal. It's up to you. And it works.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely. You know, John, let me interrupt you. I'm going to tell you a story that I think of very often. Number one, I went up to my commanding officer one day. I said, you know, being in this radio car isolates me from the people in the community. Allow me to park the car. We have walkie-talkies. Allow me to park the car, get out, and talk to the people. Introduce ourselves, me and my partner, introduce ourselves to the store owners. And it's amazing how many people we pulled into us, and we became friends. It's unbelievable. And it got to the point you looked forward to going to work the next day. Yeah. You enjoyed it. You had friends there. And that's what I used to tell the officers when I was teaching at the police academy. Make as many friends as possible because you never know when the day will come that you're going to need them. And I gave Ed an example coming here today. I was working a late tour, and I said to my partner, I'll be right back. I'm going to go get a soda at the bodega on 101st Street and Manhattan Avenue. So I go there to go in and get my soda. Oh, as I park the radio car, there's about 4 men around sitting at a table. They're playing dominoes. Now, in those days, that was against the law. We knew they were gambling, but, you look the other way. Leave them alone. It was a hot summer night. It's better they're on the corner than in that hot project,
Discretion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I went in, got my soda. I come out, and as I get to go into the radio car, a car comes up Manhattan Avenue the wrong way. So now I have to stop the guy. Can't let him just keep on going. So I stop him. He gets out of the car, and he's giving me a hard time. And next thing you know, those 4 guys that were playing dominoes, they got up, and they surrounded the guy. So I looked at the guy, I says, you want to deal with me or do you want to deal with them? And the rest was history. Yeah. It's important to make as many friends as you can when you go to work. It means a lot to them as well as to you.
In various communities, if they don't know your name, they don't trust you. I found that among the Greeks in Coney Island, even when I worked up in Harlem, people want to know your name. They want to know something about you. You're not just a uniform. You have your own problems, and they have their problems. I would guess to say that in most neighborhoods, probably 98% of the people are decent people. They just want to come home from work and enjoy their families. You get that 2 or 3% that are troublemakers. They don't like them either. And the bottom line is that if you respect them and even the people who are causing the problems, when they see you coming, they stop because they respect you and don't want to do anything in front of you. But I think that's something we've lost because of the cause. In fact, I'll tell you a story. When I taught in the police academy, when they first started to put vehicles out for police, remember, police walk the beat. Everybody was against it because in the car you couldn't see everything. So they cut the roofs off the cars. And they only made them go about 10 miles an hour so you could watch. Oh. Even if it was raining or snowing, they wanted you to be able to watch everything and what's happening. If a store's open past the time it usually closes, in a car, what are you going to do? But a cop who is concerned might get out and knock on the door and say, what happened? Your store's, you still there? Or is a guy standing there holding it up? So this is the kind of attitude I think people want. They want you to care about them, and then they'll care about you.
Absolutely. I remember this elderly Jewish couple. I met them one morning around 7:30. I was working a late tour. The store got held up. And all I hear is somebody yelling, police, police, police. So my partner and I we followed the sound, and here was this elderly gentleman. And he said, I just got held up. I have the store on Broadway. You know, I said, get in the car, get in the car. We rode around, and we grabbed the guy. And this store owner was so happy that we grabbed the guy, and he followed through with the court appearances and all, and I got to be very, very friendly with him. And a matter of fact, what I used to do, and I was telling this to Ed coming here today, I used to get into the precinct real early, and I used to walk Broadway, say hello to the store owners. I'll be seeing you. I'm working tonight, you know, and talk to them. And this one store that I was just describing, they owned a stationery store and a soda fountain. And I would notice when I start working my tour, at the end of the counter there was a coffee cup. This was going on for a few months. What's this coffee cup doing at the end of the counter? So one day I walk into the store to talk to them, see how things are going, and in her accent, she had an accent. She would say to me, "Why are you going to Chock-full-of-Nuts for your coffee?" I said, "I want to get a cup of coffee." "Don't you see the coffee cup on the corner of the counter?"
That's for you.
That was for me. I said, "You know, Mom, I go to Chock-full-of-Nuts because I know you're not going to charge me for that cup of coffee, and I don't want to do that." You know, we were very, very close, and I'll never forget one time, and this was during the NAP Commission. I stopped in to see them, and she holds up a wrapped gift. And she says to me, "You come here after work. Come here after work. I got this for you." I said, "Oh my God." She's got a gift for me, and the NAP Commission hearings are going on. So I went up to my sergeant. I said, "Sarge, you know, Mom and Pop, they have the candy store. Yeah, I know them. Well, she's got a gift for me. She held it up. She wants me to come and get it. What am I going to do? I don't want to hurt her feelings." So we thought it over, and I said to him, "You know what? I'm going to go across the street to the liquor store and get 3 bottles of the best kosher wine for Mom and Pop for the holiday, and we'll exchange gifts." That's how we did it, you know. But there are people out there. They love you. They love you.
Because you care about them.
Absolutely.
And you're right about that. Years ago, you walked in a neighborhood. I had a black partner for a while in the 70s. We were in the village. People would actually say, "Hey, officer, come on in. You need a haircut. Officer, have a cup of coffee. It's cold. It's warm out. Have a glass of soda." It wasn't about bribery. It was about friendship.
Absolutely.
And if you didn't do it, you insulted them.
Absolutely.
Certain culture, that's a big insult. If you turn down a friendly gesture. I mean, there is a line you can't cross. But I think if your intentions are good, it should be something that is permissible, especially when you have a good reputation in the neighborhood. If your boss mentions your name at a meeting and they say, "Oh yeah, we know that cop. He's great. He's there for us. He cares about us." Now that's worth a lot.
Sure it is.
And like I said, these are the same people. I remember when I worked undercover in Times Square, the hookers, right? All right, we don't agree with what they're doing, but unfortunately they're trapped in some kind of a terrible situation. If you treated them with respect, they would tell you, "You know that guy over there with the green jacket on? He's got a gun." Of course, we didn't involve them. Later on, we ended up arresting them. and everybody was happy. We've lost that. Now everybody's watching everybody, thinking that everybody's doing something wrong.
I know. In this day and age, I find that the officers that are assigned to the various commands out there on patrol, to them, it's just a job. I mean, we used to come in an hour before the beginning of our tour, remember? And used to sit in the sitting room, have your coffee, talk to the other guys that were going to start the tour of duty with you, and you discuss issues, what was going on in the neighborhood.
It's a brotherhood.
A brotherhood, absolutely.
Yes,
they don't do that today. Unfortunately, they don't do that today.
Even as far as black or white or ethnic thing, we never had that.
No,
We'd kid each
you're right.
other, and it was funny. It was just done in fun. It wasn't meant to hurt anybody. But when something happened, everybody was blue.
Right.
They were there behind. They had your back, and today, of course, everything's got to be politically correct, and even that has gotten to a point where nobody knows what the lines, what the parameters are in these things.
I'll never forget, one day I was working with a black officer in the radio car. His partner had taken off. I think he was on vacation. And we went on an assignment, and it was a dispute of some nature. And it involved a man of color, two men of color. They were arguing, and they were talking to my partner who I had for the day. Oh, brother, come on, this and that. Come on, you understand. But and I'm saying to myself, they're putting this poor guy on the spot. I felt so bad for him, but he has to do his job. He's blue, and all too often that happens, You know
what I found working in different parts of the city? If it was Hispanic cops or black cops or whatever kind of cops, they were always more angry at the people who were like them than the others, because these people embarrassed you by doing some crazy thing, some crime or some stupid act. And you could see why some cops took it personal. I'm not like him, and yet they'd call you paisan, compadre, hermano, right?
I know. But
because every neighborhood is different.
Yeah.
I remember going into a McDonald's one night about 11 o'clock at night, and the place was a cabaret. I mean, you would have thought they were dancing, the music was loud, but nobody in the community was complaining.
No.
I walked in, it was like the sheriff walked into a place, and they all stopped. And I says, I'm just here to have a hamburger. Keep doing what you're doing. I went in the back, and in fact, the security guy happened to be a black Muslim with a sword. When I walked in, I said hello. Always say hello to the man with the sword. Not even 2 minutes after I sat down to eat, guess who came to sit with me? This same guy. This is during the time when they were shooting cops. And everybody's looking at us. These two guys shouldn't be talking to each other. They shouldn't be sitting to each other. And we had a tremendous conversation about his background, and we were friends by the end of the night. When I left, he shook my hand, we hugged each other, and everybody's looking. But it comes from what you said before, communication. If you never talk to anybody, you don't know what they're made of. Mm-hmm. And they don't know what you're made of either. I mean, look at it. No matter what color we are, take the skin off, we're all the same color. Mm-hmm. We have the same problems. We do. And once you find a person, like I had a black partner, like I said, during the 70s. We noticed people were prejudiced. You ever notice that? So we used to play a game. If it was a white guy that was prejudiced, I'd be mean and he'd be nice. And if it was a black guy, we would do the same. And it would drive people crazy. But we were just trying to show them something. Just because I look like you doesn't mean I'm on your side.
Absolutely, absolutely. We
That's
talk,
social work.
Yeah, it's, we talk about compassionate policing, and I think I mentioned to Ed on the way up an example of something that happened in the Bronx last August. And it was on the internet. And 4 neighborhood coordination officers, that's a new title that's in the department now, NCOs. 4 of them were called to an apartment building in the Bronx. And this is all on video. And when they got up to the floor where the fighting was taking place, you had to see as a matter of fact, the video was taken off of Facebook. I have excerpts of that video right here. You had to see the language that was used towards these police officers, chasing them out of the building. I could never repeat what was said to them. I have it here on paper, but I could never repeat it here. It's a shame. And now these poor cops, they leave the building. They're chased out of the building by the people in the building. They go back out on patrol. How do they feel? How could they continue? If they have a positive attitude when they came to work, I don't think they have a positive attitude after leaving this building. It's a shame. It really is. And in a situation like that, the precinct commander, what he or she should do is reach out to somebody in the community that can reach out to these people and say, what'd you do to these poor police officers? They came here to help you, and you chased them out of the building. And like I said, the language was terrible. I could never repeat it. Have you guys ever had any instances like that?
Well, I can remember scenarios going back many, many years ago. Like I was working in plain clothes at the time, right after the NAP Commission in Serpico, and I was assigned to the 5th Division in Harlem and for gambling enforcement. And of course, at the time, that had been one of the most corrupt of the department divisions. And, we found ourselves as 25 relatively young people working up there. And what I came to find out after a while, that there were natural leaders in the community. Mm-hmm. And in all of our enforcement, I remember one incident only, and we would make arrests continuously, practically, because it was like a real crackdown on this at the time. But I can remember an incident where one of our officers was struck by a guy he was arresting, and and the guy escaped them. And the following day, that guy came into the station house with one of the community leaders. It was probably may have been involved in the numbers racket, and said, I understand that this fellow struck an officer yesterday, and he's turning himself in, and he wants to apologize. And it was very, very interesting because it really did speak to this idea that there are community leaders, like you were saying, mm-hmm. That maybe where an incident like you're describing really does require intervention at the police command, community leadership, level, where there has to be some kind of a discussion there about what happened to these cops, what they were trying to do, why they were summoned there, and so forth and so on. So that communication doesn't necessarily only have to occur between officers and citizens, but it also has to be an ongoing dialogue between the department itself and the community leadership mm-hmm. in various communities. And again, that's communication, very, very vital.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many community leaders out there that could intervene in cases similar to what I just described to try and bridge the gap between the police and the community. It's so important. It's so beneficial to both sides, to the police officers in doing their job and to reducing crime in the community.
When you say communication, it's amazing that a certain structure encourages a certain kind of behavior so that police officers behind glass and steel in a car drifting through a precinct, there's a blockage there. There is a structure that says, be careful. However, if you have a structure within policing that fosters communication, and that's what I think we did with the Cop of the Block program in 1975. I'd like to give you a couple of highlights of that. As I look back, maybe I'll start with the first block association meeting, but a little background. We had 17 officers assigned to, it was called the neighborhood police team then, and in growing up in Brooklyn, I knew that the block I lived on, Troy Avenue, that was my world. I didn't know about the next block either way, or, you know. So I knew the dynamic was the block is the town in the city. Okay, so why don't we have a structure that aligns an officer with a block? And a block here in Harlem was maybe 800 people on the block, big number. And so we started a program called Cop of the Block, and here's what the officers had to do. They had to start a block association, 127th to 130th Street, 5th over to 7th. They had to have started or rejuvenate two that were already there but not functioning all that well. They had to attend the monthly block association meeting. They had to then listen to what was bothering the people, and then they had to follow up and do what they could on the complaints that were presented. From a supervisory point of view, it was idyllic in that I didn't have to worry that they were going to follow up because they would be answerable to the people at next month's meeting. And it was a win-win all the way around. One of the first meetings, 127th Street, I was big on stats, burglaries, robberies. I went into this meeting on 127th Street, January, cold. The basement of a church in the middle of the block. I mean, cold to the point where coats and hats and gloves were the order of the day there. 40 people showed up. We had distributed flyers to everybody on the block. Please come to this meeting. We'd like to start a block association. Okay. I let it off and I said, maybe this is a starting point in terms of a priority for the block. I looked at the statistics for all 8 blocks, and this one had double the burglaries of any other block of the other 7. And I went on for maybe a minute or so. Then a woman who I'm going to guess was in her 80s raises her hand. Then she stands up using a walker. And she said, Sergeant, that's not the problem here. And I said, well, what is? Well, it's the dice game. And it hit me. Oh, man. The dice game in the middle of the block that we don't really pay much attention to. And then she explained why. She said, I used to babysit some of those men who are now part of the dice game. And they're drunk now and they're cursing and they're urinating. I can't handle that. So when I have to get my groceries, I won't walk down the block and go past that game, dice game, and go to the grocery store on the corner. I'll go 3 blocks out of my way and I'll get it there. Here's a woman who's got a walker to get about. And she tells this heart-wrenching story. And I said, how many people would agree with Mrs. Johnson? And there's 40 people there. Probably 30 hands went up. Okay, step 1, listen, okay? The next night, the officer, the dice game was still going on in January. The next night, the officer assigned to that block spoke to the people involved in the dice game, and that was the last night for the dice game on 127th Street. It's a small thing, but it's not a small thing. It's a quality of life issue, and similar in terms of what we talked about earlier, the people that are playing the dice game oftentimes are burglars as well, oftentimes are into all kinds of things. You know, I lost everything, I got to make it up, I got to get myself a TV somewhere. So it's having established a structure that fosters communication. Cop of the block, people of the block, once a month, monthly meeting, follow-up, and it worked. I took down some stats. I'll try to be brief. The numbers. 1975, burglaries and robberies, grand larcenies down 28% in our 8 blocks compared to New York City's increase of 15%. So minus 28 versus plus 15. Our offices averaged 8 felony arrests a year, 4 misdemeanor arrests. The citywide average was 2 felonies and 2 misdemeanors. We did more than just the cop of the block. Oh, by the way, these officers remained on call. They did not, they answered the 911 call. They were in the radio car. They answered 911 calls. The only night that they would be off is the night of the block association meeting, to prepare for the meeting, to be a part of it, and do a follow-up. We had an officer assigned to be a speaker at the schools in the precinct as part of our neighborhood police team. We initiated and coordinated, Kurt Dixon, an 8-block basketball tournament with over 200 youths participating. We were alive, we were vibrant, we were relating to people, we were doing the job as per arrest, as per concern for the people. There was another component where it was not just, in addition to crime fighting and the basketball tournament, the officers participated in the block association events. I can still remember Officer George Forcell, 130th Street. He was there. He coordinated the sanitation department coming in and doing a sweep of the whole block. George was there, broom in his hand, along with the people of the block, cleaning up the block. A similar thing for a Vest Pocket Park in the middle of the block and another block. It was a total disaster. Rat's heaven. The community, along with sanitation, attacked it and cleaned it up. It's a system that unites the people and the officers. The net result, increase in job satisfaction for the police officers, because they see they have made a difference every time they pass that park in the middle of the block, or anytime they see the basketball tournament going on or whatever. It makes a difference for the citizens. Quality of life is increased. They see the sincerity of the officers. And I just got to say, there was one woman who used to end each meeting with a prayer. And this was her prayer. Basically, and she would pray for the people of the block, the citizens of New York City, and she'd end with, and keep our officers safe. We love them dearly. Wow. This is the prayer at a meeting in the Block Association. There was compassion. Mm-hmm. Police officers to community, community back to police officers. It's unbeatable.
It is.
Now you could see why you wanted it Stubbing.
As your assistant chairman.
Thank you, Pete.
Go ahead.
No.
Oh, you want to say something?
I like to just say one thing. I like to just brush on one topic, because I like to give police officers tools. I like to give them something that they can actually go out and apply in situations. And I give you a little history of this. After the Second World War, many people who were victims of the Holocaust, who had survived the Holocaust, made their way to New York City. And many of them had terrible feelings about what had happened to them, mm-hmm. and wrestling with the demons of it and the guilt of surviving it in some cases. And the Karen Horney Clinic in New York City treated many of those people for years after the war. And there came a time when a former police officer, who had been a police officer back in the 1940s, who had subsequently become a psychiatrist, went to work at the Karen Horney Clinic to treat these very same people. And what he began to realize is that many of these survivors of the Holocaust had some of the very same, there was some parallels that he had experienced in people who had been victims of crime, mm-hmm. In New York City, as a New York City cop back in the 40s. So he began to develop something, Dr. Martin Simons, called psychological first aid for crime victims. Now, we forget sometimes as police officers how easily people can feel victimized. They can have been in an accident. They could have something very, very minor happen to them that we kind of don't consider to be too serious. And we go from job to job. Police officers go from job to job with us, sometimes seeing horrendous crimes and, trying to cope with them themselves and, some of the things. But what Marty Simons boiled it down to, and he did an experiment where he took officers at a 19th precinct on the Upper East Side of New York, where the Karen Horney Clinic was located. And he taught them a process called psychological first aid for crime victims. This was in the 1970s. And they did a little survey afterwards with crime victims who had been treated with this psychological first aid, meaning that the officers who originally responded to the crime interacted with them and used some of these techniques. Mm-hmm. And then he had a control group of other victims of crimes where there hadn't been that kind of handling of the victim, by the police officers. And what he figured out and, what the results were, but there was a very, very distinct, better feeling for those victims who had been, given that psychological first aid. And it's basically three things. It's restoring to the victim three things that they lost as victims to the people. One was a sense of power. One was a sense of dignity. And one was a sense of security. So you say, well, what does that mean? How do you restore that? How do you restore that in people? Well, sometimes it's very, very simple things. So in restoring power, when a person becomes a victim, what happens is the perpetrator or the person who has victimized them has, in a way, taken their power. And, has told the person, stand here, stand there, get on the floor, whatever the incident is. Or a person comes home and he finds that, his house has been burglarized or whatever, and he feels powerless. Well, in restoring power, sometimes you can ask the victim's permission, the person's permission to do something, or just ask them, would you rather sit in a radio car? Or would you rather stay in your car? Mm-hmm. Or would you rather sit down? Or would you rather stand up? Or would you rather go in this room? Or may I come in? Not just come in.
Right.
May I come in? We sometimes just assume that a person calls the police. It's almost in a way, it's a continuation of the victimization. You just like walk into the person's house, Well, you might want to say, just a simple question. May I come in? Well, of course, I called you, But so it's that simple asking permission to do things or asking for a person's preference that isn't consequential. Maybe how they get to the hospital or, whatever you do, or how they get to the station house or whatever it is. It can be sometimes an inconsequential thing, but just asking that permission restores that power. The second thing is the idea of restoring dignity. Every person who's been victimized will say things like, oh, I should have never have done that. I saw that coming. I should have acted. I should have crossed the street. I should have, locked my door. I should have done something different. Well, they're probably right, and they realize this afterwards. However, there is a way to restore this dignity by finding something that the person did and telling that person, when it came to that, you did the right thing. So I had a little incident many years back involving my father-in-law, who came home in the middle of the afternoon from the store. He and his wife had retired and they were shopping. And they came to the side door, and my father-in-law noticed that the door was, the screen on the door was kicked in. And he immediately said to my mother-in-law, don't come up here, stay by the car. So what happened was I said to my father-in-law, who was really, really kicking himself about many things. He had left money in the top drawer of his bureau, and they went right there to take the money out and things like that. So he was really, really lamenting all the things he did wrong. And I said, Pop, I said, you really did something very smart. I said, tell him, Mom, to step back when you saw that screen kicked in. Yeah. Well, he used to like to tell the story just to hear me say that to him, because I had this authority as a cop. you know,
Yeah.
even though I was in the family and everything.
Yeah.
It was this authority that, you know, he would enjoy me telling him you did the right thing. And finally, security, which is the toughest thing for a cop, because a cop wants to give a lot of security advice. You know, he wants to say, oh, no, you know, you need to do this or you need to do that. Oftentimes, it's for an officer's own self-preservation. He wants to look around and say, that would never happen to me because I take these precautions. This person didn't, you know. So he's very, very anxious sometimes to make that distinction to safeguard his own, well-being in a sense. You know, oh, this can never happen to me, this terrible thing. However, when an officer gives security advice, he has to be very careful to do it in a positive way. You know, not say, no, you can't use one of those cheap locks like you just bought. Mm-hmm. You know, he has to say something much more definitive and much more, let me tell you what you want to, it's going to cost you a few extra dollars, but this is what you want to do. So those three things, restoring dignity, restoring power, and restoring a sense of security, can go miles and miles and miles in interpersonal interactions between cops and citizens.
You know, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the program. And before we close the show, I want to address the women and men of the New York City Police Department. You know, just over the last 7 days, we had 2 suicides in the department, a chief and a first-grade detective. You know, we all have problems that we find difficulty in resolving ourselves, and you want to go to somebody that can help you to try to help you resolve this problem. And I know many times police officers are reluctant to go to psychological services, and I know why. They have a particular protocol that has to be followed, and you know what the protocol is. You feel like you're naked when they take your gun and your shield away from you. But isn't it better to go to psych services? Why take your life? So in far too many cases, police officers are taking their life. Why put your family through something like that? There are resources out there that you can go to. There's PAPA. That's the police organization providing peer assistance. You can go to them with strict confidence. Believe me, they will help you. If you have a friend of yours that is in the department that you can confide in, use that person as a sounding board, okay? Don't try to resolve it on your own, especially if you're severely depressed. So please, listen to what I've just said, and if you have a problem, reach out to someone.
As a clergy, I would ask my fellow clergy out there, pray for the police every Sunday or Saturday of your services, because they walk on the dark side of life. And I've seen people do things that are impossible physically, but we know where they're coming from. Snapping handcuffs behind their back, throwing cops across a room. Again, the cops need prayer.
Absolutely.
And I challenge you to do that.
Yeah.
Every Sunday or every Saturday, whenever your service is, pray for them. Because they're just like you, wearing a uniform with their own problems to begin with. Yes. But pray for them.
In far too many cases, they suffer in silence. So until we meet again, may I say God bless. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact this organization. It's the New York City Police Alliance. We are part of the Building Bridges program, and our email address is buildingbridges911@gmail.com. You can contact me, or I have the phone number for Papa if you have any problems that you'd like to discuss with them. That phone number is 1-888-267-7267. They're there to help you, so please reach out to them. Thank you. Take care, and God bless.